Hi, Dr. Harrington. My name is Sarah Pereira, and I am working towards becoming a ninth and 10th grade math teacher. The subjects I will be teaching are Mathematics 1 and 2. For my first lesson plan, I did it for a ninth grade classroom. The lesson should be about 30 minutes. It's for Mathematics 1, so this is typically Algebra 1 and a little bit of geometry involved as well. But the topic that we would be covering is solving inequalities and absolute value inequalities and knowing how to graph them. So at the beginning of this instructional lesson, I'm going to hand out the notes and the homework when they first walk through the door, and they will actually pick it up themselves. So I'll have them in stacks on a desk. As soon as they step into the classroom, they'll pick up what they need for the day in each one from each pile, and then they sit down and get ready to start grading their homework. So I'll have the answers from last night's homework on the board. They'll go through that, and after they finish grading, they're settled in. I'll start going over the answers with them as a whole class, gathering their whole attention. Then we'll go into the notes for this lesson plan. So this covers a standard in California Common Core, and it is clear to the standard. It's Area A, REI, and it solves linear equations and inequalities in one variable, including equations with coefficients represented by letters. So this is under Mathematics 1, and it's something that is built upon in other courses. So that's also why I picked this one. Some vocab words that students who have English as a second language are going to learn in this subject are absolute value, inequality, and a few more. So when the lesson begins, I'll go over the notes. Simply, it's just going to be me running through some of the problems myself, and we'll talk through what an inequality looks like, talk about the comparison it has to just normal standard XY equations and how they can simplify the inequality to get it in its simplest form. Then they will draw their number lines and they'll plot and graph their inequalities and learn how to do that in correct and proper technique. So for the sequence of events, it'll just begin with that introduction. It'll begin with the note-taking. After we finish the notes, the students will then get their homework, and they will have 12 problems on solving inequalities involving different variables. And in the problems, a good example is when they have z minus 2 in absolute value brackets less than or equal to 5, and they'll just have to learn that when they're doing the inequalities, they have to simplify it by putting two different options in parentheses where that whole bracketed absolute value conjunction of numbers is going to be in positive and negative, and they're going to have to work out both options and learn how to plot both of them. So in that, after the 12 questions are done, they will also have 2 word problem activities. An example that I wrote out is the pressure of a typical scuba tank should be within 500 pounds per square inch PSI of 2,500 PSI. Write the range of optimum pressures for scuba tanks. So they'll have to find out how to write this in inequality form, and they'll be able to work with their group. They should be sitting in groups of 4 to 6, and they'll work on it together. I would assume that this question, the students would have a hard time beginning on knowing where to start. So I might, after having multiple one-on-one discussions with different students across the classroom, I might bring their attention to the front of the board and I would help them get started, or at least set up part of the inequality with their help, and return to the whiteboard, start writing some of it down, look to them, ask them for questions or input of what they might know already how to do, and then we'd work together in that way and collaborate, me and the students. After that, they would have to work on it on their own. And then the last section of the homework is 4 problems on inequalities with numerators and denominators. So they're going to have to learn how to do it in fraction form. It's the same process, but we'll go over that and try to help them to understand how it is the same process, even though it looks different and looks more challenging. So at the end of that, the students will work on it together. It'll be something that is assigned to them in class, and what they don't finish in class, it will become homework. So I will let them independently work after about 15 to 20 minutes of taking notes. I'll bring their attention back to the front of the board, and we'll go over 2 questions as a class from their homework. I'm going to ask 2 different students to come to the front of the classroom and do the problems on the board for the whole class to see, and I'll try to throw variation into that throughout the school semester, but for that class day, it'll just be 2 students and that's it. And they'll demonstrate the problems, then they'll sit back down. I'll check and make sure that everybody has those answers as they walk out of the door, but before they pack up and get ready to leave, they're going to have to show me that they've completed at least some of their homework that day, making sure that they're on task and there's accountability for them so that there doesn't just become a habit of talking in class and not focusing on the actual content. So I'm hoping to find a way to calculate that into my grading, have some preparation points or some other variation of that word, so they would know to make sure before they leave my classroom each day, they would have to check in with me, make sure that their homework is prepared for the next class session that we have together. Doesn't mean they have to do the whole thing, but at least I need to see significant extents of it completed. The formative assessment will be incorporated into doing the problems on the board for the whole class. It's my goal to make sure that the kids are not under the assumption that they're getting tested in formative assessments. It's simply just to incorporate their attention at the end and making sure that they are on the same page as their classmates or the person sitting across from them or next to them. If the students are feeling pressure in those formative assessments, then I'm not doing my job right. They should simply just be able to speak out and offer their suggestions, and I can just guide them into making sure that we're not just getting voluntary suggestions, but also correct suggestions on what the answers and the next step are in each problem. So that would be the conclusion of my lesson plan, and math is kind of hard to explain over video without showing you my papers, but I hope to attach an example of some of the questions that the students would be going over on my website link, and I will link that document to you later when it is posted. And thank you very much for listening to my first lesson plan. Have a good evening.